And now time for us to discuss more of these headlines in simple keywords with Adam joining us on Zoom. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena.
Happy Wednesday.
Wednesday?
Yeah.
It is a Wednesday.
Are
Gosh,
you kidding me?
I forgot it was a Wednesday. I thought it was a Tuesday for some reason. I was like, are we still in Tuesday, really? But yeah, Wednesday.
So I come bearing good news, apparently. It's Wednesday.
Yeah, yeah. One day has advanced in my head.
All right, wonderful. Glass is half full this morning. All right, let's jump into our keyword news portion of the day. We're going to try to clarify some of these major headlines for you. This is our first pick of the day.
Prosecution reform bills.
So President Moon Jae-in has promulgated two controversial bills on prosecution reform at his final cabinet meeting. This has sparked anger from the prosecution and the opposition party PPP. What's the latest?
Right, well, the promulgation came hours, as you mentioned in the headlines, after the DP railroaded the last remaining bill through Parliament. There were two sets of passages. Now, the two bills are set to reduce the prosecution's investigative powers. I won't go into too much detail of what they are because we've already covered that many times on the segment before. But with the Cabinet's approval, the legislation will take effect in 4 months, so September. Now, the revised Prosecutor's Office Act will reduce the prosecution's investigative powers to only two crime fields, namely corruption and economic crimes. That's down from the current 6, and as I said, it'll start in September. The prosecution will be able to investigate election-related crimes only until the end of this year. Now, the amendment to the Criminal Procedure Act calls for limiting the scope of the prosecution's supplementary investigations. And Moon, while passing or approving the bills in his cabinet meeting, said concerns about political neutrality, fairness, and selective justice in the prosecution's investigation have still not been resolved. He added that there are evaluations that reforms have not been enough to win public trust, which is why, he said, Parliament has taken a step further in separating investigations and indictment.
All right, let's take a look at the reaction from the opposition party that had fiercely tried to stop the bill from being passed as well.
Yeah, so as widely expected, it was mostly anger from the PPP. The party's floor spokesperson, Park Kyung-soo, said, quote, "It did not even take a day for the country's 74-year-old criminal justice system to collapse and for parliamentary democracy and the rule of law to die," unquote. And now the PPP claims that separating investigation and prosecution rights is not a trend that can be seen in advanced countries. So basically saying that Korea is going backwards on that kind of system. And it added that it will cause extreme inefficiency in the criminal justice system as well. Prosecutors, of course, were also angered by the passage and promulgation. The Deputy Prosecutor General, Park Sung-jin, told reporters that the reform bills were not passed through what he called a legitimate process. He noted that the National Assembly and government didn't hold in-depth discussions required to gain public support. And he also said the Supreme Prosecutor's Office will review all possible legal measures to reverse the legislation, including a constitutional suit. Police, on the other hand, said they would reinforce their organization to improve their probe capacity and cooperate with the prosecution with mutual respect. Of course, the reform would give police greater investigative power. So, of course, they wouldn't really be opposed to it. But they haven't really outright welcomed the move as well, kind of, I think, in consideration of the prosecution and opposition party stance.
And as well as the logistics of it, because, I mean, as we phase into maybe this different chapter, perhaps even with the fierce opposition, it would mean that there will be gaps in between in the investigation processes that are happening as we speak, too. But these are just criticisms. We'll have to wait and see what comes in months to come. On to our second keyword of the day.
National tasks.
So as you mentioned yesterday, Yoon Song-yeol's transition team has announced 110 national tasks. It's a rounder number now. Run us through the key ones.
Right. Well, the tasks are mostly aimed at realizing 6 broader goals set out by the incoming government, and the 110 tasks that will help realize the goals range from helping small businesses fully recover from the damage of the pandemic to expanding the housing supply, as well as scrapping Moon Jae-in's nuclear phase-out policy. Now, the team estimates an additional 209 trillion won would be needed over the next 5 years to implement the plan. So that could be included in a budget proposal if they do come up with one. Now, the task for foreign policy and security include pursuing North Korea's complete and verifiable denuclearization, normalizing inter-Korean relations, strengthening the South Korea-US military alliance, and a, quote, revolutionary reinforcement of the country's capability to respond to North Korean threats. Economic security is an overarching theme, with tasks such as securing an overwhelming lead in the semiconductor, AI, battery, and other future strategic industries. The incoming administration expects to increase chip exports by over 30% from last year's amount to about $170 billion by the year 2027, which would be the final year of the Yoon administration. It's also aiming to have Korea become one of the world's top 3 robot producers as well. As for reversing Moon's nuclear phase-out policy, the Yoon government plans to resume construction of the Shinhanul number 3 and number 4 nuclear reactors, and it also wants to export 10 nuclear reactors by the year 2030. As for cooling heated real estate, the incoming government says it will establish a roadmap to supply 2.5 million houses, as well as relax house-related taxes and lending rules as well.
All right, so those are the proposed 110 tasks to be, covered by the Yoon Suk-yeol's administration. All right, let's turn our attention to our COVID-19 coverage. This is our third keyword of the day.
New variant concerns.
With an impossibly long name. Turning to the latest on the pandemic, despite easing these virus curves, health authorities are remaining vigilant after confirming the first case of a more infectious Omicron subvariant. What's the latest, Adam?
Right. Well, cases are starting to pick up again, but only slightly. I mean, today's reported tally could be in the 50,000s, similar to yesterday. And there are concerns over the Omicron subvariant dubbed BA.2.12.1. It is quite a name, a mouthful. They haven't come up with a code name for it yet. Not yet anyway. Now, the first case in Korea was reported yesterday in a woman in her 50s who was coming into Korea from the US. And a KDCA official by the name of Park Young-jun said the new strain is presumed to spread up to 27% faster than the BA.2 variant, which is otherwise known as stealth Omicron. But he noted that it is yet to be known whether the subvariant causes more serious infections. So we know that it is more infectious, but the severity of infections is yet to be known. And Park added that contact tracing is now underway and that officials have been closely monitoring the inflow of the new variant. Now, the new sublineage of the Omicron variant has caused a recent surge in infections in New York and elsewhere as well. So a lot of authorities will be looking into imported cases mostly as well. Despite the concerns of the new subvariant, health authorities here have lowered the warning level for COVID-19 in non-capital regions from high to medium. And it marks the first time in 15 weeks that the risk level for non-capital areas was deemed lower than high. The risk levels for the capital region and the whole nation were both downgraded to medium last week. So basically all round, the infectious risk level is medium now.
All right, and on to our fourth keyword of the day.
Inflation woes.
So inflation concerns are still growing, with consumer prices climbing the fastest in more than 13 years last month. Tell us the details.
Yeah, this sounds like a broken record now, aren't we?
when it comes to
and this is of course all comes in the wake of a spike in international raw materials, energy prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as sharply rising global demand for goods, especially amid pretty much a global trend of easing COVID-19 restrictions. Now, according to Statistics Korea, consumer prices rose 4.8% on year last month. The last time inflation rose at that pace was back in October 2008. Data show that a steep increase in consumer prices started in the fourth quarter of 2021, The growth ranged between 2.3% and 2.6% between April and September last year, and it ranged between 3.2% and 3.8% between October 2021 and February this year. Now, the rise in local inflation comes despite the Bank of Korea raising interest rates. This just goes to show that external factors and geopolitical factors are still largely to blame for the price hike. So it's pretty much out of the control of the central bank here. In April, gasoline and diesel prices led the inflation with an on-year growth of 28.5% and 42.4% respectively. We have seen a slight decrease in prices at the pumps in Korea, but not by much. We are seeing some gas stations having gasoline prices at the 1800 won range, although they are quite rare to see. While international crude prices have stopped its kind of sharp advance, the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia could possibly cause another spike in energy prices. They have been quite volatile. A Statistics Korea official said there is a high possibility that consumer prices will continue to grow at a fast pace, as there is yet nothing really to curb the runaway prices at the moment. And some experts even predict that inflation could rise to the 6% level just by next month. So in a very short space of time. So yeah, things are getting more expensive by the day, by the week, and by the month.
All right, there you have it. And finally, on to our fifth keyword of the day.
Russian sanctions.
The European Union is working on new sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. And in some cases, it means that Russian oil, for example, would be deemed, virtually unfoundable in certain European countries. And what does this mean at the pump? Higher prices, essentially, right? What's the latest?
Right. Well, the new sanctions would target Moscow's oil industry, yes, and more Russian banks and those responsible for disinformation as well. Now, the plan was tweeted by Josep Borrell, who heads the foreign policy unit at the EU's Executive European Commission. Borrell said the new sanctions would be presented to the 27 EU member states for approval. They'll be meeting on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is expected to announce the new sanctions as well, and that they could include a ban on imports of Russian oil by the end of this year. Russian President Vladimir Putin put the West on notice on Tuesday that he could terminate exports and deal in response to the sanctions burden that were imposed by both the EU and the United States as well. Such a move could further hinder the global market, hence why experts predict that energy prices will surge once again. An embargo on Russian oil would deprive Moscow of pretty much a large revenue stream. But reaching an agreement on the measure has pretty much divided countries of the EU bloc, which relies on Russia for 26% of its oil imports. And Hungary and Germany were among those with reservations against an oil embargo. Among their concerns was that surging energy prices would hurt EU economies already grappling with inflation. But German Economy Minister Robert Habeck said Berlin was prepared to back an immediate EU embargo on Russian oil, saying his country has reached a situation where it can actually bear an oil embargo. Russia's energy exports to Europe have so far largely been exempt from international sanctions, mainly with that surge of energy price concerns in mind. But Kyiv says they are funding the Kremlin war effort with millions of euros every day. So with that call from Ukraine, it's kind of a balancing act, but they are steering more towards that oil embargo and sanctions.
Despite heftier costs for locals in the case of European Union nations. Thank you very much, Adam, for today's coverage. Have a safe Wednesday. It is a Wednesday. We'll see you tomorrow.
You too. See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.